And in today's video, I'm going to look at the current state of PSO2 New Genesis and where I think it needs to go from here. Hi everyone, and in today's video for PSO2 New Genesis, what I wanted to do is revisit a video that I did in about July last year. And basically what I did back then is I did an objective look at the current state of the game and my honest opinion on it, and where I thought the game was doing well, where I thought I needed to make changes. And I want to do something similar now that we've had quite a few months since that last video, just to see if anything has changed, if anything's moved for the better or worse, and just to give my overall impression on how I think NGS is going at the moment. So just for a quick background, for anyone who doesn't know, my very quick background with Phantasy Star Online is I started out with the GameCube version back in 2003 of PSO, and I've played through PSO GameCube, PSO Blue Burst, PSU and its expansion, all of the portable games except for Phantasy Star Nova and Idler. And I played the Japanese version of PSO2 for about 8 years before playing NGS. So I've played quite a few of the online games. So I've been around the series a long time, and because of that I can kind of see why SEGA do some of the changes that they do. I kind of get an idea for the direction of travel that they're wanting to go in with NGS. So I thought what we'll do is we'll kind of base it similar to the last video how we did. So the first thing I looked at in the previous video is we looked at the story. And in the last video in July, I said that the story was quite slow, but that it looked like it was starting to develop because at that point then they just introduced the new race, the Starless. So I thought, right, okay, this is where the story is going to start taking off. Unfortunately, we're still not really any further forward. Since that video in July, what has actually happened in story? It's actually hard to think of what has actually happened in story. Aina has become a trainer. Manon is kind of off doing her own thing and you bump into it occasionally. Aina is having a bit of a meltdown with her new trainees. And that's more or less it. We haven't really heard any more about any of the Dark Faults. We don't really know anything more about Alpha. Maybe the odd little thing here and there, like we now know that there is a new type of recovery item called Luminosine, which conveniently only turns up in that one story mission. But honestly, we're really no further forward, and it's really frustrating. The story of Phantasy Star has always been a little bit hit and miss, to be honest. Even going back as far as PSO, a lot of the story in that game was just given to you through message capsules, but it let you sort of piece the story together at your own pace. It was a kind of hands-off story. It was only from PSU onwards that we started to get a more directly orchestrated story that would actually spell things out for you easier. With NGS, I just kind of feel like we're sort of floating around, not really doing a whole lot. It just feels like at this point now in the game, you know, we are quite a way into NGS now, and I just don't feel like anything's happening. It's really, really frustrating, particularly as someone who wants to enjoy the game. Having no real backstory whatsoever is really annoying. The other thing that kind of irritates me with the story is the fact that we keep getting these new bosses introduced. So, for example, we got Darkfalt's Aegis, which, to be fair, was then in the story as well. We got Darkfalt's Solus. There is still no mention whatsoever of Darkfalt's Solus in the story. We're now getting Darkfalt's Dalian. There is no mention of Darkfalt's Dalian in the story. We're getting all of these new Darkfalts pop up from nowhere. There is no explanation for them whatsoever, and there is no story link. Now, yes, they may tie them into the story later, but it just confounds the story by having these new bosses pop up from nowhere that we know nothing about, and they're just there. So for me, the story really has, I'm not going to say it's taken a downward turn because I don't think it has. I just don't think it's gone anywhere. We just seem to be more or less in exactly the same place as we were back in July, which, considering the amount of time that's passed, is really, really not very impressive. So the story of NGS is still, for me, really one of the weak points. It is pretty abysmal, honestly. I really, really hope that the story does pick up soon. What we need really is a major chapter update with a big change in story. Some major event needs to happen very, very soon. Otherwise, people are just going to give up on the story if they haven't already, because it's just nothing. So I don't really feel like I can say much more on the story for the simple reason is that there just isn't anything to talk about, because it's just it amounts to nothing, more or less. So the next thing I want to talk about is the combat in NGS. So combat has always been quite a, how to put it, controversial subject in NGS, because the obvious direct comparison is to compare it with base game PSO2. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much entirely again, because I did cover this quite extensively in the last State of the Game video that I did. But essentially, a lot of the problem with NGS combat is that it gets directly compared to PSO2, which had way more thought and art, way more customization. I do think there are positives and negatives to that, and go watch that previous video if you're interested in seeing those. What I want to do in this video is compare the combat in NGS to how it was back then. So since that video, we have started to get some tech and PA customization in NGS. That has been received, I would say, lukewarm. There are some customizations that seem really, really worthwhile. There is the obvious one that everyone knows about, which is the rifle blaze shot, which seems pretty ridiculous. Some of the other ones do seem genuinely really useful. I actually really enjoy one of the partisan ones for thrust and javelin. That gives you like a power up to the thrusts once you get so far through it. I think that's a really, really cool one. There are some really, really interesting ones, but a lot of them are kind of whatever. You know, I tend to find with them as well that a lot of them have very negative downsides, and even once you've leveled them to maximum level, the downsides are still quite big. So examples of that would be, there are ones that increase your PP cost for using the customization, and some of the PP cost increases are huge, and whether they're really sustainable, I'm not sure. There is one at the moment that I've been quite frustrated with, which is one of the Waker customizations, and it's the one for the Fredran riding Photon art. The one that I tried is one where it starts to fire these energy waves off while you're flying, and it gradually drains your PP while you're flying on the Fredran. Unfortunately, the rate that the PP drains at is incredibly fast. It makes it so it doesn't really feel like a good utility Photon art anymore, and the rate of the shockwaves that it fires is so slow. It's rare you'll actually really hit much with them. You'll get maybe 2 or 3 off before you transition to another PA. It just doesn't really feel worth using, honestly. And I feel like quite a lot of the PA tech customizations are like that, where there doesn't really seem to be much benefit to them. There may be a slight benefit, but it's offset by a negative as well, so I don't really feel like it's something that you necessarily need to do. I know, honestly, for a lot of my characters, I have just kept them without any customizations, because I'm still trying to figure out which ones feel like they're worth using. I am happy that they've introduced these customizations. I think it is a really good idea, and anything we can do to diversify the combat more in NGS is always a good thing. But I do feel that I would like to see a few more slightly more radical ones that do more interesting things. A lot of them at the moment are just big damage for more PP cost, or your range is increased but you do less damage. They're quite sort of bread and butter, really. So I would like to see a bit more experimentation with that. Hopefully that does happen going forward. Obviously there are going to be several waves of these PA customizations, so hopefully that does happen going forward. I would also, just on a personal note, I would like to see some more love for Tekka, because I feel like Tekka is getting absolutely shafted on these tech customizations. Yes, it can access the technique customizations, but there are no customizations for wands. And it just feels like wonders kind of been totally forgotten about. So I would like to see some kind of new Photon arts or new customizations for wand directly. I don't even really play Tekka now and again, but it just feels really unfair that Tekka is getting left out of this. When even Waker is getting customizations for its Photon art, I think that Tekka should be as well. So that's my overall thoughts on the customizations. I think it is a good positive step to have these, but I do feel like there needs to be a little bit more diversification and a little bit more experimentation with them as well, just to make them a bit more fun to use as well. So other things, obviously we have had quite a few balance changes since the July video. I do feel that most of the balance changes have been pretty positive and have been genuinely well received. So I'm quite happy to see more of those. So in regards to combat as well, we also need to talk about combat areas. So the combat areas, we haven't really had much new on that front since July. So I think the biggest one is obviously we have Lucille. I can't remember if Lucille had launched originally in the July video. I honestly can't remember when that released for the first wave. The main combat zones, we have obviously had the upgrades to increase the level caps on those, which is always good. I do still feel in combat zones like the enemies just disintegrate. There doesn't really seem to be any challenge whatsoever, particularly in PSE bursts. PSE bursts are just a large blob of enemies that just disappear as soon as they spawn. There is no challenge whatsoever in any of the zones. The only thing we got that was remotely a challenge was the Crimson Realm. And Crimson Realm is a whole thing I want to talk about as well. But Crimson Realm, the great thing about Crimson Realm is it would spawn this new boss called Driverus, and it was actually pretty hard hitting, quite hard to actually kill in the time limit as well, because it had a lot of health and it ran all over the map, so it was actually quite hard to kill. However, Crimson Realm makes me really, really angry because it was quite a cool idea. You know, we got increased rates and everything. You know, this chance of this boss showing up, it made the Kvaris combat zones a lot more interesting. I was actually quite surprised by it. I was quite negative on it when it first got announced, but when I tried it, it was actually not too bad. And it lasted for, what, 1 or 2 weeks? And then it disappeared. And I don't think it's come back again since. And this kind of leads me on to one of my real big issues with NGS at the moment, which I don't know if you can call it planned obsolescence, but there is this issue with NGS at the moment where they will release content and within a few weeks it'll be dead because something else will come along and completely supersede it. Example of that would be the time extension quests. From what I have seen, next to no one is running the time extension quests anymore because there just isn't really much benefit to doing them. At the moment, everyone is obviously doing the seal for the, for a chance of the XOV weapons. I think once there's some new content, people will probably move away from Lucille. Lucille does seem to be the exception where that does always seem to have some people doing it, and I think a large part of that is because it's a good growth mint farm and it obviously is a daily quest as well. But I do feel like a lot of the other content that they're adding to the game, within, let's be generous and say a month or two, it's generally dead in the water. There is no real sort of permanence to anything that NGS gets added. There is this constant push to do whatever the new thing is. I'm all for doing new content. I think, you need to keep adding new content to keep people interested, but it shouldn't come at the expense of making previous things pointless. So that comes to light, I feel, in the urgent quests the most at the moment. So with urgent quests, quite often I just won't bother doing them. For the simple reasons that the majority of them are just not worth the time. So really the only ones I would do at the moment is potentially the mining based ones. In reality, I don't really do those just because I don't personally enjoy the defense quests, but they are generally worth doing because they do have decent rewards. The Darkfeld Solus quest is probably worth doing because it's a fun fight and you can at least get Flugel guards from it potentially. Remnants of Ambition is probably worth doing because of the chance of rares. And that's about it, I think. I don't think any of the Steer quests are worth. Any of the Steer urgent quests are worth doing. For Kvaris, it pretty much is just Remnants of Ambition, possibly Mining Base. I can't remember offhand if Mining Base Kvaris has been updated yet, but definitely Remnants of Ambition. For Elio, to be honest, the only one that's really worth doing is maybe the False quests, just so you can get some Aegis Soul 4 capsules from Darkfeld's Aegis. The regular Darkfeld's quest just doesn't seem worth doing because the best things in that is Teasers, which you can buy from the player shop for like 1,000 Mazetta now, so it just seems really pointless even trying to hunt them. So a lot of the urgent quests that are in the game at the moment just seem completely pointless and a total waste of time. The experience isn't bad, I guess, if you're doing them for experience, but again, there are faster ways to level. I would really like to see more urgent quests that actually feel like they're worth doing. I would imagine that once we get the Darkfeld Stallion quest, the urgent quest version that is, I would imagine that that'll probably be worth doing because I'm assuming that the 11 stars will probably be available in that as well. As it stands, when we do get them, we are only getting the 4-player version first, so it will be really difficult to get them. But this doesn't just happen with urgent quests either. There is a lot of almost obsolescence with old content. As new content comes in, it just seems to completely replace older stuff and just make it irrelevant. So doing things like the Rage-Odd Gorge. Rage-Odd Gorge was a really fun couple of weeks while it was active. It was a great area to farm because you had the ancient the ancient enemies to farm. You had Recon Gigants, regular Gigantics would show up there. You had plenty of veterans. Brilliant area, and you could just farm it for a while and get a lot of different items that you needed. And then it just died. And it seems like not many people do it now. And this is the same with a lot of other content in the game. And unfortunately, because of how the game release schedule is, I don't really see it changing. I would really like to see them, even if it's just a case of going back to some of the older content and just tweaking it to make it relevant again. You know, we get updates to combat zones now and again to increase the enemy levels, and that in turn, changes the drops that can happen. So why can't the same happen to other areas or other content? I just feel that needs to happen and just keep the game, like the existing content, fresh, as well as adding new content as well. But another issue with this, and this is kind of linked, is that another problem I have with NGS is that there is a massive reliance on limited quests. So the limited quests in the game, some of them are really fun. I will give them that. I'm not going to say we shouldn't get limited quests. Some of them have been really fun. I actually really enjoyed the old Sonic one that was added. I thought that was a really fun time. It wasn't hard or anything, but it was just a fun quest to do. And there have been a few others that have been really good fun as well. But unfortunately, there is a current thing with NGS where the game is very heavily focused on these limited quests, which is fine while they're active. But there are also long periods in the game where there is no limited quest. And when there's no limited quest, you fall back on the existing content, and then you have the same problem that I've just mentioned with a lot of the content being irrelevant now. And it just feels like you then start to struggle for things to do. So I would like to see a little bit of a move away from this massive reliance on limited quests. Keep adding them by all means. People will be happy to do them. I do enjoy some of them, but I would like to see that backed up with some content that is permanent. There was some signs of this happening with the time extension quest because they are permanent quests, but unfortunately, because of the rewards you get from them, they are largely outclassed by other content, and because of that, no one does them. So I would like to see them continue to add permanent content that is actually maintained over time and updated, so that it stays relevant with the rest of the game, and then just sprinkle in limited quests every so often just to keep the game fresh. That's my personal opinion. I know that SEGA have, they've got their schedule that they're working to. They know how they want to play this game. And unfortunately, I just don't think it aligns with the way I would like the game to go. So I really don't want this video to be overly negative. So while we're here, let's talk about some things that are actually good in NGS. So first of all, I covered this in the previous video, but the character creation in NGS is still pretty much second to none. It is absolutely fantastic. You can essentially make exactly what you want to make. Just to illustrate that point, this character is actually based on an artwork that I had commissioned years and years ago before NGS even launched, and she looks pretty much identical to the artwork. The hairstyle's a bit different at the moment, but the artwork is pretty much identical. So you can basically make exactly what you want. I've seen all sorts. I've seen people cosplaying other game characters, anime characters. I've seen people making Gundams. It is insane the amount of creativity that you can have with this game. And that also extends to things like the creative space as well. That is an absolute creative haven for anyone who is that inclined. I've messed around with it a little bit. I'm actually in my creative space at the moment. I would like to experiment a bit more with it. It's just having the time to do it. But I do feel like the creative space is a really good framework for just building whatever you want to build and just seeing your creations come to life. It's a really cool idea. And the fact that it's just separated nicely from the main game as well, it just means that you can, once you've played the game for a bit, you can just jump into the creative space and just chill there for a while and build things if you want to. And I love that about the game. I also love that NGS doesn't really require you to spend a huge amount of time on it to stay relevant. So, as you know, if you play the game, the daily quests will literally take you less than 5 minutes to do usually. It's no effort whatsoever. You get a little decent flow of money coming in for it. They have actually now started adding these extra dailies on, I believe it's on Sundays and Mondays, which give you a bit more money intake as well. And that's a really good idea. There are also other tweaks coming down the line. So we have things like the augment transfer system coming up, which should be game changing for NGS. Because one of the issues at the moment with gear is that because the release schedule for new gear is quite fast, you will find that you are constantly upgrading your armor and weapons for these little negligible stat boosts. And the problem with that is that it's really, really expensive to actually kit out your gear properly. So to fully affix, fully grind, add a level 6 potential to your weapon, it actually costs a fortune. Not just in Mazetta as well, even just having the materials to do it. You know, the amount of things like photon chunks that you need just to potential 6 a weapon is insane. You know, magnify this across a weapon and 3 pieces of armor, and it can be a massive undertaking, getting a really nice gear set up and active. For that then to be relevant for a couple of weeks before it gets replaced by something new is really annoying. But having this augment transfer system should help alleviate that, hopefully, because then you should just be able to transfer the augments from your previous gear to your new gear, and that should then make your new gear a lot simpler to build. I'm hoping it's implemented well. I don't know how it'll function, and whether it'll be similar to how base game PSO2 was, or whether it'll be a new system altogether. We're still waiting for a bit more information on that, really, which hopefully we might get some more information on that in the next headline. But it is a really positive step to hear that we are getting things like that. I do hope they keep adding systems like this to the game and trying to sort of streamline the process a bit. But I do also want to see other very simple things brought into the game as well. For example, why, at this length of time in the game, why do we still have no way to trade with friends? I appreciate you have a player shop, but realistically, if I find a weapon that I don't want but my friend's hunting, for me to get that weapon to my friend is a case of basically putting it in my player shop and hoping they buy it before someone else does. It would just be nice to have a way to just trade things with friends. I don't know if there's a reason they did it. Maybe it's to try and combat real money trading or something. I'm really not sure. But it would just be nice to have the ability to be able to trade gear with friends, whether there's restrictions on it or not. It would just be nice to have that option. It seems stupid that we are this far into the game and there is still no way to trade with people. I feel that SEGA need to go back and look at base game PSO2 and look at some of the popular aspects of that game and bring them over to NGS. I don't want to see NGS become just a clone of PSO2, because I've played PSO2 for 8 years. I've had my fill of it. I want something new. And I feel NGS does give me that to an extent, but I do also feel that NGS still feels like a game that's in early development. Without being too insulting, it does kind of feel like a demo at times, just because occasionally you will get periods where there is next to nothing to do, and it is very, I think the best way to put this, it can feel a little soulless, I guess, at times. There are certain things in the game that, you know, are brilliant, and occasionally you will get something in the game that will make me think, yes, SEGA are finally back. This is what we want from NGS. An example of that would be when we got Daffod's Solus. Solus is such an amazing fight. I love everything about that fight. It's really, really fun. It actually had some drops that were worth going for, even if they were ridiculously hard to get. And that was like almost like a glimmering pearl of NGS. It was like one of the best things they've added to the game. And I just don't feel like we've hit that again since. So hopefully Dalian is another step like that. Obviously the 4-player version, maybe not so much, because that's for really, really high-end gear players. But hopefully when we get the Urgent Quest version, that fight will be fun and we can get some decent gear from it. And I'd just like to say that really, just give me a reason to log on to NGS and go and look for some rares, go and hunt things with my friends. I just want these simple things that we used to do in the older games like PSO and PSU, where we would just log on, you would go and hunt something, have a good time with your friends. And I feel like that isn't really a thing you do in NGS at the moment. If you want gear, you just go and buy it from a player shop because it's dirt cheap. Unless it's some ridiculous gear like these new 11 stars that are coming out. I just want there to be a motivating factor to get me to want to log on to NGS and play more. At the moment, I log on, I do my dailies, I might play for maybe half an hour to an hour, and then I'll log off for the day, because I just don't feel like there's enough pulling me into the game. And I want to be pulled into the game. I love this franchise, and I want the best for it. And I just want this game to continue to develop and expand and just improve over time. And I just really want the best for the franchise. So I hope this hasn't come across as too negative a video. I am trying to sort of paint both sides of the picture with NGS because I do feel it has some very, very good moments as well. It's just that I do feel like, unfortunately, at the moment, I do feel that some of the negatives are creeping up a bit too much, and I hope SEGA do something about it soon. Compared to the last video, I feel like we have maybe improved slightly in terms of things that have been added, but there are still a lot of the same problems that I highlighted in the last video as well. So I hope that's been relatively entertaining. I know it's just been basically me ranting and giving my opinion on NGS for the last God knows how long, but I hope it's been interesting. I'll probably try and do these maybe once every 3 to 6 months, just so people who are maybe wanting to check out the game can get an idea of where it is at the moment, because it does get a lot of negative press, and I feel that if the game is presenting itself in a positive light, then it shouldn't be affected by negative press. So I kind of want to give these videos every so often just to let people know what the current state of the game is so they can better inform themselves. Again, this is all totally my opinion. Other people may have totally different opinions of NGS. Some people absolutely love this game. Some people detest it. Believe me, I've seen some comments that have been on both ends of that spectrum. So I hope that's been relatively useful at least. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, or joining as a member. Although I do have problems with NGS, I do still play the game I would say at least a few times a week. And I tend to do 2 videos a week at the moment, which is normally one NGS video and one for one of the older games. I also stream once a week on Sundays as well, which is typically one of the older games that I play. Also follow me on X at Section Skyline. We also have a Discord you can join as well. If you go to my community posts, there is a link in there to how to join the Discord. I will try and, if I remember, to put a link to the Discord in the video description as well. Yeah, hope it's been interesting, and hopefully see you guys in the next video.